All right, I am going to go ahead and get us started. Happy Friday, the 31st of January. We've made it to the end of January, the first month of 2020. Thank you all so much for joining our webinar series for the Global Good community. This is our first one of 2020, and we're really excited to have folks today. Can we go to the next slide? Awesome. So I'm just going to kick this off with, a few announcements and introductions to our speakers. And then we'll go into the background on the activity, on the sustainability work that's been done with OpenLMIS and Resonance. We'll have some comments from Heath talking on some additional sustainability work that Dial has been leading. Throughout the discussion today, we're going to have some live polls. We're going to have a live poll, so we really want to make this very interactive. And then we'll discuss some sustainability planning activities, lesson learned, and really leave some time for some Q&A for you all. And just a reminder, if you could please go on mute. Great. So I just wanted to share quickly a few updates. First of all, some reflections from our Global Good Innovator meeting, which took place last month on December 13th, following the Global Digital Health Forum. We have a report that will be forthcoming and shared with the community. We'll probably share that full report out with everyone when we share the link to the recording and the slides for this webinar. So really excited to share with you that report. We're just so happy with how that meeting turned out and the engagement of everyone. I think there was a lot of really nice spirit of partnership in that meeting, and we were able to balance some really nice discussion on technical discussion, operational discussion, and sustainability discussion, which really lends itself to this webinar. So just a note that we'll be sharing that out next week. A couple of updates on engagement with the Global Good community in 2020. My role is the community manager, and one of the things I do at the beginning of every year is I write a strategy kind of for our team to guide us on, what are we going to do this year to engage the community? How are we going to build on what we've done in the previous year? Here, we've heard from the community on what the needs are and how can we grow that. So just a couple of notes on things that we're considering doing this year in 2020 that I've put into my strategy. We're going to open up several of our webinars so that they'll be broader than just this audience. Not all of them, but some of them. And the reason we're doing that is because we see a lot of value in bringing audiences outside of this group to share their technical expertise and also to share our learning and have that engagement with some broader audiences. We're going to be coordinating with AHEN to try to link up on some of the work that they're doing. So it'll also just be kind of linking you all more in with other things that are going on with other organizations and other communities. So that is a goal for us this year. We're going to continue with our webinars. We are also going to continue with more technical webinars and even thinking about increasing the frequency of some of the technical webinars to make them like a series of technical webinars in addition to the webinars that we offer each month. We'll continue with our newsletters, and I am so excited for the content that is in the newsletter that's going to come out in February. It's very rich with updates from our community, and I think really responds to some of the feedback that we heard from the innovator meeting on what you all would like to see and how you'd like to learn and continue to engage. And then, there'll be a couple of other things. I'm really trying to focus more on gender and putting that specifically into some of the work that we're doing that came up in the meeting as well. We're looking at how we partner with other stakeholders in this space, like continuing our partnership with Dial and also partnership with UNICEF and other partners who are in the digital public goods space and so forth. So we've got a lot of stuff that we're going to do in 2020, and Digital Square is very excited about it. Notice E, I know that you're all eagerly anticipating the launch of Notice E. We have several RFAs that will be part of Notice E, and we talked about this at the innovator meeting last month and how these will be very much aligned with the shelf-ready requirements. So, excuse me, we anticipate a launch of Notice E more toward late February, possibly early March, but we still would really like to aim toward late February. We're working really hard to keep on that timeline, so we will keep you all posted. We will be having another webinar next month, and I don't have the date yet, but I will share that information on that webinar, like what our topic is going to be next month, and our follow-up to this webinar today. So we do have something scheduled for next month. Stay tuned, and we will have a Notice E launch ideally next month, so stay tuned. All right, let's get into the run of show today. Okay. We have a number of experts who are going to be presenting in our webinar today. I'm super excited about their expertise, their thoughts, what they've been doing on business models and sustainability models, really driving into OpenLMIS. And this is a very complicated topic that many of you have expressed interest in learning more about because it's complicated, because it is something that impacts all of you. I'm not going to read the bios of everyone here, but we've got I'm just so impressed with the wealth and depth of experience here. We have from Brandon Bowerstacks-Johnson from Village Reach. We have Brian Taliesin, the director of OpenLMIS. We have Emily Clayton from Resonance, Heath Aronson from Dial, Kim Curry from Resonance as well, and then Rebecca Albin, who is our OpenLMIS community manager. So just pleased that we have everyone on the line today to give this dynamic presentation. We mentioned it's going to be interactive. So with that, I will turn it over to the team.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Looking forward to chatting with you all, and please feel free to add any questions or comments that you have in the Zoom chat. We'll be looking to reserve some time and get to answers to your questions or comments as at the end of the session, and then also if we don't get to them because of time, we'll follow up with you as we go along. So with that, let's go ahead and get into it and go to the next slide. So I wanted to tell you a story of Jean-Louis. We met him back in 2010, where he manages the pharmacy at a health facility in Senegal. And at that time, Jean-Louis had 7 different processes and systems he had to follow for ordering and managing supplies. One of them was for essential medicines, one for ARVs, another one for malaria, and then still another one for TB, and then yet another one for vaccines. Oh, and then there's also was family planning supplies. So one of those systems had him ordering through a computer that was there at the facility. Another one he entered in the stock on hand in a mobile phone. Others were on paper forms, and then one had no form at all that he sort of created out of his notebook. And then he'd receive the supplies on different trucks at different days based upon the different programs and warehousing. And it seems that every source of funds and supplies had a different way of doing things. In short, Jean-Louis was often challenged to calculate the supplies that he needed based upon the unknown demand. And to address this, each funder was wanting to do that, and so they created their own logistics management information system. Rahima in Kenya had 3 different phones from different implementing partners. And so we were creating all these different solutions without addressing the real problem. So everyone was really going fast and to address this, but they were going alone. However, to go far, what if we went together? Next slide, please. So we did. And that's the cool thing about OpenLMIS. Through this shared investment and effort of almost 24 organizations, we combined all these differences in our software into this shared global benefit. That's been building on features over this last decade with additional functionality. Next slide. Thanks. And so it's now used across 10 different countries with over 11,000 users, like Jean-Louis, where people also like Batur Alphas in Mozambique now has an accurate view of the actual consumption information. And before this, it was hard for him to know what he actually needed. Now having access to this data, he's able to reduce stockouts and also address the issues of overstocking. But what if, next slide. Oh yeah, a lot of builds. What if the next slide, the lights went out? We have a global good, but funding, even the basics of managing and maintenance is not there. What if Jean-Louis, Rahima, Bertour, and the 10,000 more like them lost the visibility to manage supplies for the millions of beneficiaries that they serve? So we've created this great global good, but we don't have a sustainable financial model that is good enough to keep it going. I'm not ready to turn the lights off, so let me turn it over to Heath to brighten things up a bit. Next slide.
Thanks, Brian. So the Open Source Center has been enjoyed walking alongside OpenLMIS and working with residents over the past year, thinking about their sustainability challenges. At the same time, the Open Source Center has really been kind of focused on offering sustainability planning as one of its standard core services. Next slide. So we've been going at this for about 2 years, both doing a little bit of working with projects, figuring out what their needs are, and just kind of talking through what the sustainability challenges are and figuring out what it is that they truly need, and then beginning to make pathways to solutions. So there's really 5 things that we've identified as the kind of core things that a project needs to think about when they're thinking about their long-term sustainability. Many times projects start inside of an organization like a university or an NGO. And maybe that might not be their best long-term home. Maybe it is, but that's really the starting point, is to say, where should this project kind of live in the long term, so that a community can come alongside of it and really kind of steward it on its sustainability journey. So the first thing that they need is fiscal sponsorship. They need a place to kind of park the intellectual property, et cetera, some type of a legal entity that may be able to facilitate funding, but there needs to be something. The second is an organizational home. So this is a little bit different than a fiscal sponsor, because the way that we view an organizational home is as the primary maintainer of the project, there needs to be somebody who has that kind of central vision and mission with the roadmap to say, this is where we want the project to go. They are the primary steward of the project. And if they were to go away, the project would probably just fizzle. So we really need to identify what that organizational home might be. The next is just advisory and technical assistance. There's a lot of things that organizations might not know. If a team tends to be very technical, they might not know enough about licensing and legal, or even specific business challenges. So that's one of their needs. Access to funding. Money needs to come to these projects in various ways. So really being able to think about what is the diversity of revenue sources, grants and other, that can be directed towards the project. And then the last is kind of a connection to a community of practice. There's a lot of these digital public goods, and there can be lessons learned from others. And so, our goal today is to kind of look at some of the things that we learned through the process with OpenLMIS and how they might be able to extend to other projects. Next slide. So as kind of a starting point when we work with a project is to kind of map them out to see, like, are they kind of in our Open Source Center sweet spot for support? And so with every kind of project, we kind of identify, I'm going to measure them on 2 different areas. One is their kind of commitment to social impact, or an SDG. And then the second is how mature are they on their sustainability journey? And so, as you go further up in the top right of the quadrant, projects become more mature, and they're not really our priority as much as the yellow box in the middle, which are projects that are kind of firmly on their sustainability journey. Also fair to say that if you're looking and you see your project there, for sake of illustration, they were just placed there. They don't exactly represent how we may have ranked you. Next slide. The next starting point that we have with each project is to be able to look at the entire ecosystem and stakeholders that may be involved in the community for that particular project. And so we've chosen to use 4 basic terms that the wider open source community has been using. The first is maintainers, to really identify who's primarily responsible for a project. The second is contributors. How does volunteer time, volunteer code come back to the project? The next is sustainers, which is the sources of money. Are there donors? Are there other sources of capital for the project? And the last is consumers. So consumers is maybe not the best term, but it's the one that we're using, and that's those who use the software. So implementers, governments who use it would be here under consumers, all of those working together for the end users. Next slide. We also feel like it's fairly important to look at the different aspects of a project and to really say that not every single one has to go to the same place. So if a project is moving out of an NGO, not all of it has to move to something else. So we'll look at a project along 3 different lines. First, we'll say, what would be the best kind of legal fiscal sponsor? Where would be the best place to kind of park the code? You know, very often this might be an open source foundation. Many projects have been in part of Apache or the Linux Foundation or Software Conservancy. Or it might be a choice to start a new nonprofit, and that would be the proper fiscal sponsor. The next is to identify who the primary maintainer will be, and that does not have to be the same as the fiscal sponsor. And the last is the catch-all for all the other things that need to happen for a particular software project to be successful. So these are what we call the operational activities, and they may be done in one organization, they may be done in many. There may be startups involved, there may be implementers, but this is the, for a particular project to reach its social impact, a diversity of players need to be involved to be able to make it successful. Next slide. And I want to throw this one up here too, because this is another exercise that we do with projects. To be able to begin to identify what are some different revenue sources or potential business models that can be built up alongside of this project. Maybe they're inside of another organization that is adjacent to the open source project, but which may be able to direct revenue back to the project. And so we look at a wide variety of revenue streams, and then we map them based on how much overlap that particular activity might have with their organizational impact versus how much revenue it might be able to have. And from that, we'll be able to choose a couple priority revenue streams that we can then financially model and work backwards into a business model. So that's an overview of some of the ways that we're working with some of the global goods. And if we don't know you and you haven't set up a time to kind of chat with us, we'd love to set up a call and see how we might be able to help. So that's it for me.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Yep.
we can hear you.
Live poll. I'll be starting that in Zoom, but just to go over it quickly. The first question will be, is sustainability a topic that your organization is actively discussing? That is it a current priority? And the second question will be, if you and your organization walked away today, how long would your global good be sustained? So I will be starting that here. And just take a couple minutes to please complete this poll.
You're missing an answer on there. You don't have less than 3 months.
Very good point, Dan.
Need a 0 there.
Yeah.
Oh my. Survey says.
These live polls are really cool.
I'd like to know whoever would answer the first one as a negative, as in you're not discussing sustainability. I want to know who those lucky kids are.
All right, I'll give a couple more. All right,
Like we're all patient of these results.
All right. So can you guys all see the results?
Yep.
Yep.
So as you can see, Sustainability is a high priority for 88% of you. And 3 to 6 months is the majority answer. As Dan said, it could have been 0 to 3 months. But just giving a really good overview of how everyone is looking at sustainability, which gives us just a good way to head into the next part of our presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments on this poll? All right.
Any surprises? Is this about what you guys expected?
Number 2 seems even lower than I expected. It's
Yes.
yeah, we're all in a tough, I think, a tough environment to fund these global goods.
Yeah.
Yeah, I expected it to be worse.
Maybe some optimism, a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. Let's carry on.
Great. Next slide. Thanks, Caitlin. So what you see here in this slide are a few animals of different shapes and sizes. And the quick point I wanted to make here that all of us here today and all of our global goods come in many different shapes and sizes. And therefore our sustainability journeys will look very different. So we all have different budgets, scopes of work, scales, levels of maturity. So we can't expect to all shop at the same store for our sustainability solution, right? So just to make the point that today we're not trying to be prescriptive, we are really going to take you through a full list of activities that OpenLMIS did, but really wanting you to think about these as more of a menu of options for you to select from or choose your own adventure when the time is right, and not to say that this is the right way or the wrong way to do things. So this slide shows the OpenLMIS sustainability journey in timeline form. And maybe the first thing you'll notice that jumps out is that the timeline starts in 2015. It's a long timeline, and we've been at this for a number of years. And the process has involved a lot of different workshops, research, international visits, webinars, community meetings, so a wide variety of activities, which started back in 2015, where we started with a more informal process internally. And the more and more layers of the onion that we peeled back, we realized that it was just too big of a task for us to tackle ourselves. And so in 2018, we engaged our friends at Resonance as consultants to help us dive deeper into a lot of these issues. If you can click again, Caitlin. There we go. So this is a really high-level overview of a lot of the topics that Resonance supported us with research on. And starting from the left-hand side is looking at private health and how the OpenLMIS features and workflow could potentially be applied to paying clinics and private health. Similarly, any global good would want to look at revenue streams for the private health version of whatever your global good is solving for. But because we serve public health clinics, we looked into private health clinics. For community and partnership, we dug a little deeper into our existing community structures and partnerships and asked ourselves what types of new partners and expertise would bring value to us. What are the community structures that are working well for us and we'd want to maintain in the future state versus what are we open to changing? And we thought about this really as an opportunity to break from what we have been doing for a long time and think about how to course correct in our future state. The next topic, financing, is obviously a huge one. Looking at new revenue streams was an enormous focus of this work. And it really started with recognizing that the revenue streams would likely come from multiple sources. So it was about putting all those different options on the table and examining them. And I think Kim from Resonance will talk a little bit more about this process that they took us through. The next you'll see is agriculture, which may seem a little out of place, but really what that means is that we looked into adjacent markets for OpenLMIS. And for us, the adjacent market that we dug more into was agriculture. But the relevance for other global goods is that you would really just want to ask yourself, are there other are there other markets? Are there other uses for your global good that would only require a small pivot in your to really capitalize on? For us, agriculture, after looking into it, we decided it wasn't really the best fit for us right now. There would probably be too much investment.
Rebecca, it sounds like we've lost you.
Planning, I will leave for another, because of timing, I think I'll skip that one. Next slide, please. So community engagement. I'm our community manager, so that was a really big focus for me. And for our community, it was important to create opportunities for really proactive community engagement throughout this process to aid with decision-making, ensuring community alignment, and just making sure everybody's inputs went into this future state planning. And this approach worked really well for us because it gave our community members a sense of ownership and stake in the whole process, and made the process not top down. People's votes and opinions were really counted, and that's what drove our process forward. The bullet points that you see are just a list of the types of activities that we organized to keep the community engaged and informed. And those included webinars, workshops, other meetings for brainstorming and getting input, and also reporting back out to the community on our activities and findings. We utilize online surveys and voting mechanisms to get anonymous feedback and actually make decisions in a democratic way. And it was important for this community stewards to facilitate the decision making, the assigning of roles for decision making, and just making sure that the processes were laid out very clearly for everyone. Another role for the stewards was to ensure that all of our activities and plans and documents and even our meeting notes were transparently communicated and available to the community and to the public. And we utilized our wiki a lot for this, and that became our sort of main repository for all of this documentation. Next slide. So what did we actually do? After all of the research was collated and our findings were boiled down, we were left with 3 options, which I'll actually dig into each one because I think each of these options would be quite similar across other global goods, and they would be faced with the similar choices here. The first would be to create an independent entity, and for us that would be a 501c3 in which we would self-fundraise and sort of be our own legal entity. The option number 2 is partnership to handover, which meant we would gradually transition our product and the community over to another company or organization with the understanding that they would have existing resources and structures that they could leverage in order to really continue to grow the product. And option 3 is what we called unsupported release, AKA break the glass, which meant that we would release our code out into the public for really anyone to take up and use as they pleased. So of these 3 options, our community debated a lot, and in the end, we decided to move forward with option 2, the partnership to handover. And we've had some encouraging conversations already, which have led us to believe that the right partner is out there to take OpenLMIS forward and help it to thrive. And that sort of leaves us with where we are right now. Our next steps for 2020 are to work together to identify who that partner is, to start sort of interviewing and negotiating potential contract terms. And we've created a specific working group within our governance committee to take that on. Next slide. And now I'll turn things over to Emily.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, everyone. My name is Emily, and I am a senior manager with Resonance's sustainability team. And I am going to tell you a bit about Resonance and our approach to business modeling, and then I will hand it off to my colleague, Kim, who will dive into Resonance's work with OpenLMIS. Next slide, please. Resonance is a global development consulting firm delivering market-based solutions to solve the world's toughest challenges. We support companies, governments, investors, and philanthropies as they deliver lasting impact by helping them articulate and execute their vision for global good. Next slide. At Resonance, we work at the intersection of corporate sustainability and international development. Resonance bridges the gap between private sector interests and global development agendas in frontier markets by creating shared value, cross-sector partnerships, uncovering new business models, and reducing supply chain risks. Working across sectors, we create durable solutions that meet both development and business objectives. Next slide. Our client base and our reach is broad. We have worked across 60 different countries, and we bring perspectives from our work with public, private, and social sectors, allowing us to speak to the needs of a diverse set of stakeholders and to holistically and systematically work towards solutions. Next slide. Central to our holistic and systematic approach is our business modeling methodology, breaking down the market into its component parts. We analyze the product and the three main groups that influence the course of any product or company: the customers, competition, and partners. As a global good looking for alternative revenue sources to sustain the maintenance and upkeep of the technology, many options exist for future revenue generation. Yet the sustainability solution will be different for each global good and needs to fit the product's unique value proposition. Creating and testing assumptions based on product and market dynamics is essential to understanding the feasibility of a particular model. Next slide. And with that, I will turn it over to Kim.
Thanks, Emily. I'm going to talk about our approach and dive into some of our key activities to give everyone a sense of the effort and collaboration that was involved in this engagement. So as mentioned previously, this engagement was 13 months long, and we had a handful of core team members who were consistently engaged. We partnered closely with the Gates Foundation, Village Reach, folks on this call, and other partners to complete a number of intensive activities that can be bucketed broadly into 4 categories. These include mapping and valuation, assessment of growth strategies, partnerships and financial modeling, and ongoing engagement and action. As has been mentioned already, we recognize that no two global goods are the same, nor is any sustainability challenge the same. And so it's really important for organizations to tailor their approach to the specific circumstance of the global good. And to inform the depth of the investigation for OpenLMIS specifically, we found the biggest factors to be applicability, funding, resources, and timing. And as a whole, we realized that this ecosystem is very ripe for new operational models and partnerships. And we don't have to tell you that. Given the votes that we just saw, that all makes sense and seems to align with everybody here. Next slide, please. So we kicked off the project over 13 months ago with a visit to Malawi and Tanzania to first answer the question of the value of OpenLMIS and if it was worth sustaining. We conducted over 50 initial interviews with internal stakeholders, including partners in the Ministry of Health, as well as subject matter experts in the space. We conducted a deep analysis of everything we had learned, positioning us well to start evaluating business models with everyone in the community. We held a big workshop in DC, which helped lay the foundation for understanding what core attributes of OpenLMIS were essential to sustain and understand what the community was looking for in terms of a model. Next slide, please. Throughout the process, we encouraged participation of community members and recognizing the deep expertise of everyone in the space. It was really interesting and important to learn from everybody who was involved in the process going forward. And we worked to determine short and long-term plans for OpenLMIS. We worked very hard to align on goals and really figure out what the right time would be to conduct each activity moving forward. Specifically for OpenLMIS, we were exploring whether there were potential new customers who would be willing to pay for OpenLMIS. We conducted a deep landscape assessment using country GCI scores and digital maturity models to figure out which countries would be appropriate for a solution like OpenLMIS. As Rebecca mentioned, we also looked at adjacent markets within health and also outside of health. And to figure out if this was sustainable, we also looked at market share and the competitive landscape. We conducted market sounding visits to Bangladesh and Vietnam and spoke to other organizations to learn about best practices, their journeys, and also assessed go-to-market plans and risk, SaaS models, and other scenarios. Next slide. For OpenLMIS specifically, we recognized opportunities for OpenLMIS in private health in both low and middle income countries. And as you can see in this graph, we saw very high risk and high return to pursue new sectors and new geographies in the immediate term, and and both low risk and low return for OpenLMIS to continue on its current trajectory. In the middle, however, we saw an appropriate balance of risk and reward should OpenLMIS pursue partnerships in private health. Next slide. To explore this a bit more deeply, we looked closely at public-private partnership models, brought a specialized nonprofit lawyer into our workshop to discuss different legal structures and considerations, and evaluated various ideas. We balanced this evaluation with financial models, looking at market share, various funding structures, funding types, as well as developed a pitch deck for potential investors. This process was quite intensive as we weighed different options and partnered with the community to evaluate the best path forward. Next slide, please. One of our key learnings was that there was likely not one path to reach sustainability. We recognized it would take a combination of various avenues, and we looked at various methodologies for independent revenue generation, including direct sales, indirect sales through partnerships, and even sales through the public health offering, helping to build capacity and accountability for governments that OpenLMIS works with. And of course, for each global good, this matrix will look very, very different. Next slide, please. And all in all, it was a fascinating project, and we recognized the complexity of these challenges and both the creativity and partnership needed to solve them. We look forward to the next phase of the OpenLMIS journey and learning how other global goods approach their sustainability conversations. Thank you. Back to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Kim, and everyone. I'm just trying to follow along in the chat for all of your different questions. I see lots of interesting comments. One comment that stuck out to me that was interesting is that a lot of these projects are synergistic and codependent. So that's why it's so important that we're all here together and learning together, and hopefully learning from our experience. The question that just came up, all of this sounds not inexpensive. Who funded this work? I can say that the resonance engagement was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who were partners with OpenLMIS and funders of OpenLMIS. Other questions I'm looking. There was a comment. Somebody wanted to dig into the decision of choosing to hand over to a third party. Is there a specific question, or?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that casually thrown in at the last slide or last few moments was her saying that it sounded like LMIS is no longer going to be supported by the founding organizations, and they're trying to find a third party to pick it up. And I think that's interesting avenue to take. I know that I would not be surprised if several of us have thought of that at different times, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about that decision, if I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah,
sure.
You want to
Okay,
take it, Rebecca?
I mean, I can start. It's a long answer, I guess. I'll just start by saying, so digging deeply into those three options, just at a very high level, we looked a lot into the independent entity and turning into a 501c3. And I think the short answer is that there was a lot more financial risk involved in that option. And because we didn't have a sustainable funding source to get us to that point, and we didn't really know how long we'd be able to last and fund our activities, option 2 seemed safer. And the third option was really something we were trying to avoid altogether. I mean, releasing the code was an option, but it's very uncontrolled and has a lot more risk to it. So I'll let others chime in.
And this is Brian. And one of the aspects of this as well was also reaching back out to our community of getting their direction of where they wanted us to go. And so that's a little bit of also where the partnership to handover was sort of led us that direction. If there was that lower risk model and we had a sustainable revenue source right away, it sort of goes back to that 3 to 6 month type of window that a lot of you mentioned. If we had longer than that, I think we'd be able to to pivot to a 501(c)(3) type of effort. Over.
Okay, sorry, and introduce myself. This is Wayne Bote at IntraHealth. To go back to this original concept, then, to cut through the pleasantries. So in other words, you've realized that there's no one that's going to fund OpenLMIS on an ongoing basis. And so the organizations that have been putting their blood, sweat, and tears and own money into it have all decided that, well, you may say that you're going to give it to a third party, but to me, giving it to the third party or releasing the code is essentially along the same lines of, we're not going to invest it anymore because we don't see the ROI in continuing to invest.
A little bit like, yeah. So there was,
what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different. There is a lot of blood, sweat that was going into it, but it was funded by USAID and the Gates Foundation largely. And so if there aren't additional implementations coming along to fund the ongoing care and maintenance, we've got to we have to find a different way of being able to keep the existing implementations going.
Got it. So you're trapped like the rest of us in
yes,
the only
exactly.
money to keep things going is in an implementation. So you steal from the implementation to be able to keep the core going, and then beg, borrow, and steal to have money, anything extra to add to the core.
I think you've nailed it. Yes, I think you've nailed it. Brandon, would you concur?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add a few nuances here, though. Part of the conclusion of last year's sustainability planning was that private health, and there was a slide that briefly mentioned this, so expanding from just the current customer base, which is public health, meaning public health supply chains in all those countries on the map that were shown, using the tool, to also having the tool serve private health customers, meaning hospitals, clinics, pharmacy networks in low and middle income country markets, but the kind of private or nonprofit hospitals, not just the government hospitals, or pharmacies or clinics, not just the government pharmacies or clinics. That is one key aspect that expands the customer base and the sort of revenue stream. Who all is going to want to continue paying for features or improvements or subscriptions to continue getting updates that can maintain the software. And so the expansion into serving the private health sector as well as the public health sector also means that has sort of the most synergy with option number 2 there, with working with private players in this landscape who already have sales teams, who have relationships in many of those country geographies, who are already providing software subscriptions and tools in those markets. And so they can actually help us reach private paying customers, hospitals, clinics, and pharmacies who want to use this tool and who have the same kind of supply chain problems as Brian mentioned at the beginning, the same challenges with paper record keeping and confusing orders and shipments and numbers that take a lot of manual effort to add up, and it's hard to keep the right medicines on the shelf. So the idea of a bit broadening the user and customer base of the global good, I think, was another important synergy with that pathway number 2.
Great.
So
thanks.
I want to one last question and then I'll jump off the stage. I think it's a real interesting concept that you're not seeing a good revenue stream when we have the $1 billion supply chain contract that USAID is in control of. It's a contract; they can order commodities, do whatever they want, and that doesn't dovetail so nicely into OpenLMIS that you have a revenue stream for as long as that supply chain contract lasts. So I'm sure you guys have already explored that, but it's a sad lack of vision that USAID is funding something like this and doesn't make it a requirement for its largest supply chain project and largest single contract.
And maybe I can respond to that one too. And I agree. I'll sort of flip it 180 degrees. Part of the decision the OpenLMIS community made in that pathway number 2 was also to create a maintenance fund where implementations using the software would be asked to pay some annual maintenance fees that would chip into the core software continuing to be updated and have ongoing releases. And for the implementations that pay into that fund, they get a voice in prioritizing, hey, these are the bugs or these are the performance improvements that I want fixed. And so in that way, actually, many of those countries, many who are, as you mentioned, Wayne, supported by USAID, where the USAID folks are on part of the kind of working group committee for how we structure this. We're talking about creating a new mechanism, a new fund where countries using the tool who want to know that it's going to continue to be around and know that they continue to have a voice in what bugs get fixed and what improvements are made, and in the roadmap, that they can chip into that fund, and that fund we sort of aggregate all those dollars together and use that to prioritize what the public sector, public health implementations continue to want out of the product. So we are definitely, the challenge you mentioned is exactly right. It's a challenge of there's implementation dollars and there's not core software dollars. And so our response to that is in the structure to create a new mechanism for that.
Great, thanks, Brandon and others. I think before we continue with the slides, we do have some more presentation to go. I'll just try to answer one more of the questions quickly. Somebody asked on the chat, who is the ideal third-party type of partner? And so just quickly, from our perspective, our terms, so to speak, would be that someone would be able to keep the global good alive of OpenLMIS, ideally aligned with our principles of digital development, interoperability, and open source, designing with the user in mind. I'm sure you're familiar with all of those. That implementations would continue to receive support and ideally be able to continue contributing back to the code. Support with ongoing core maintenance, and also with the community. So we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that our community, all of our resources, and all of our ways of supporting users of OpenLMIS continues to live on. And we're also looking at a lot of partners that have the ability to collaborate in a lot of cool ways with the product. So utilizing or leveraging what some of these bigger companies could do to improve or expand upon OpenLMIS is also something we're looking at with partners. So I know there's other messages on the chat, but I think we have to keep moving along because we have some more slides to go. So maybe Brandon, I'll turn it to you.
And then you'll need to unmute, Brandon.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks. So again, this is Brandon from Village Reach, and wanted to share a few lessons learned in this process that we think are helpful for other global goods and all the people having these kind of conversations. So first slide. I think the biggest thing we learned was to talk early and often about the why. And if you advance the slide, what I mean here is like, why does your open source tool or global good even exist? And to be talking with the other players, other participants in your open source community about that exact question. When we really dug into that, certainly we all talked about this all those years ago, as Brian mentioned, when OpenLMIS was first created, but I don't think we talked about it often enough and regularly enough throughout the whole life cycle of the software and the project. And so there's lots of different answers we heard from people. Is it just a temporary solution to fill the gap until private solutions serve these markets? Are we trying to do this to stop the reinventing the wheel phenomenon and let multiple organizations collaborate? Are we trying to go open source to help avoid vendor lock-in, or to give countries like ownership to customize and own their software, or are we making it open source and then assuming we'll get developers just pouring in to contribute and that will on its own solve the sustainability challenge? That last one is seems to me to have been a false assumption of like, if we magically go open source, we'll just get people coding on it for free, and that'll solve all our problems. But there were lots of reasons and different reasons among our community members of kind of the why And so I really encourage you to be talking with your community and partners about the why open source? Why are we in this together? Next slide. Secondly, I think it's key to have clear decision making. We have a governance committee, we have multiple other sort of committees and decision-making structures in OpenLMIS, and so that's been really helpful. But there were even moments in this process, as clear as we tried to make it, where we'd have different subsets of meetings with different stakeholders, and all of a sudden realize, like, wait, are we not exactly all clear on which group of people are making which decision about how we move ahead? And so I think making sure you maintain clear decision-making throughout all of these conversations is really critical. And it was good we had a face-to-face community meeting last year to sort of get the whole community on the same page and understand that we did have some consensus about how to move ahead. Number 3, I think it is very important to mix entrepreneurial thinkers with the people who have the kind of global health and development background, or the people who have the software background. If you advance the slide, a bit about what I mean by this. I mean, for people who maybe joined our initiative with a master's degree in public health or with a background in global development, there's definitely a language and a set of ways of thinking, like theories of change and M&E plans, that those people come with that are just totally different language and way of thinking than when we started, for example, talking with the folks at the Dial Open Source Center or talking with the folks at Resonance Global, and in our sustainability conversations, when we've really had a mix of people with that kind of entrepreneurial thinking, like an MBA, the language and the thinking about how to raise venture capital dollars, or how to get impact investment and justify that you align with SDGs in a way that can unlock those sort of dollars, or that think of business models and revenue streams. It's just a different language and a different mindset. And I think putting those people together in the room with the software tech people to solve the problem together has been really important for us. And I encourage you all to do the same in your communities. Next slide. Lastly, the no one size fits all approach, and we had the elephant slide earlier about that. Definitely, I think different global goods will have different journeys and different answers to those why questions, and different mixes of revenue that are going to sustain. So I hope that some of what we've shared today is helpful in kind of the process, the kind of questions to ask. So Brian, I think you have the next slide here as the kind of what can you, okay, sorry. I have one last slide. A couple other points. These were some of Resonance Global's takeaways that I think I agree with on this not one size fits all. That yeah, there's not just one revenue stream that unlocks sustainability, but that the global goods ecosystem is really ripe for new operational models, new partnerships, and I think it's a critical time to have this conversation. So I'm really glad that Amanda and the Digital Square team pulled this all together today, and hope we can continue having a sustainability conversation here in the Digital Square community. So Brian, I think you have the next slide about where people can go from here.
Yeah, and I appreciated all the conversation that was happening in chat, and thank you, Heath and Jake from Dial as well. And I think there is with all of us sort of being in the same predicament, I think there's a large opportunity to see how we might, similar to how OpenLMIS was started, of pooling shared benefits together. Can we do that same piece and having those sort of shared insights and linkages to resources that we can keep the lights on for all of us for a longer period of time? I think Sky Gilbert had mentioned a while ago that it was going to take about $50 million to basically turn all of these global goods into a sustainable model. So we've got a lot of funding to be able to do that. And one of the things as well is, so keep this dialogue going among all of our colleagues, and then also within your own individual groups of the open source community. There is that not one size fits all, and so what works for OpenLMIS may not necessarily work for the sustainable business model for your particular global good. We really appreciated the use of resonance in this mix, largely because we were so focused on the code and the community that we really weren't necessarily optimized with the MBAs and other aspects around market sizing and market dynamics associated with that model. And so we've really benefited from that. I'm happy to sort of provide that information. OpenLMIS is a very transparent piece, and so we'll have all these links on our wiki, and hopefully you'll be able to learn from the work that we've been doing. So with that, I just want to thank you all for all the time that you've spent on this, all of the blood, sweat, and tears, and the funding from many of you on contributing to the OpenLMIS community and contributing to all the different pieces that are happening with OpenLMIS and with the global goods that are represented through Digital Square and others. It's a phenomenal piece of work, just thinking back from the pilotitis in the early 2000s and where we have gone today. It has been a phenomenal shift, and looking forward into the next decade.
Hey, thanks, Brian and Brand and Emily, Rebecca. It's really to see. We've been kind of riding alongside you guys. Interesting, and I do think that this is valuable for other products, and so yeah, I would just encourage anybody to up with the Open Source Center as well. We are definitely trying to pivot to try and address some of these issues, for the broader community, and in conjunction with Digital Square.
So with that, Amanda, do you have any final words?
Am I off mute? Yep. Sometimes I double mute. I'm just reading this chat as we've been going today. I think this is an incredibly rich discussion, and appreciate very much Resonance and OpenLMIS. Thank you for being so, in a way, vulnerable and sharing all of this with the community. These are the kind of conversations that we all need to have and want to have. And I think there's some requests here where we can have working groups to think more about, other global goods thinking on sustainability models and the future pathways. And that's something that we can certainly look into and continue maybe a series of webinars on sustainability. Weigh in, is that something that I'm hearing you guys might be interested in?
I'm sorry, I was typing too diligently in the chat. What was the question?
I mean, there's just some I'm hearing and reading, a lot folks want to continue this conversation and find a way to engage with other global goods on sustainability and business models. Maybe not a working group, but we could possibly have a series of these and bring other global goods, invite other global goods in to present on how they're doing their thinking. Is that something folks would be interested in?
I think Ya just said it quite nicely, that if we took all the money, then time we spent discussing sustainability and invested in our technology, we'd get a pretty far along. It's frustrating to hear that OpenLMIS went through the process that we've all gone through and has come to the same conclusion that all of us are at already. So I don't think it's a working group. I think it's a commiseration session.
Okay.
More than anything else, and then go back out and rattle the cups yet again.
Fair enough. Well, you have camaraderie here. All right. With that, guys, thank you so much. I know you're all very busy, and it's Friday. Many folks in the U.S., particularly on the West Coast, are preparing for their Super Bowl parties for Sunday. This is a fantastic discussion, fantastic chat. Thanks again to our presenters, and have a lovely weekend, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.